Well, as stated before the break, the much-anticipated interview of Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is set for today. Now, Zondo is the last of the 4 candidates to be evaluated by the Judicial Service Commission. The panel has been conducting interviews with 4 of the country's top jurists as the search for the next Chief Justice continues. So let's cross now to our reporter Hasina, Gori and Natasha, Phiri also there. And this for more on today's proceedings and perhaps also just a quick look at what's gone before. Hasina, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, quite an exciting day here in the north of Johannesburg. There's been much anticipation over this interview. It's the last day of the 4 candidates being interviewed for that Chief Justice position this morning, compared to the last few days where the mornings are relatively quiet as we wait for the commissioners to come through as well as the candidate. We've seen a security sweep being done. We were actually moved out of the main venue for a bit to allow for a security sweep to be done ahead of that 9 o'clock proceedings that's expected to start with the Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. But I want to recap to yesterday. Quite a long day. It was the longest interviews we saw in the last of 3 days, with Gauteng Judge President Mlambo on that hot seat. The gloves really came off. He was asked on some of his judgments, but also those allegations that were leveled at him. It took about 6 hours of questioning and that issue being ventilated before the chair, Kolapete, ruled that because there was no substantial evidence and seemed to be rumors that were being leveled at him, that these comments as well as the questions and responses should be expunged from the proceedings. However, one of the commissioners, Naren Singh, did raise it that this issue and these comments were allowed to be ventilated and were disseminated as the proceedings have been live on many different platforms. And was it too little, too late? So that was a question that came out. We spoke with some gender activists as well last night, hoping to get them in conversation sometime today, saying that they feel that these comments and the manner in which it was done seem to be irresponsible, and that it seems to be used for cheap politicking. And on that note, I want to bring in Natasha, Phiri, my colleague who's here as well. Let's dive into yesterday's conversation that was had and the interviews. We saw those accusations, but also Judge Mlambo was brought to question and respond some of his judgments where it seemed to favor the current administration.
Thank you so much, Hasina. Well, it was quite a lengthy day yesterday, and as you said, Gauteng Judge President Dustin Mlambo was actually scrutinized over his judgments, particularly, he was asked about his rulings and judgments that are perceived to be in favor of the current President Cyril Ramaphosa and against former President Jacob Zuma. Mlambo said that he applied the rule of law in all his judgments and says it's completely unfortunate that there's a perception out there that he's favoring the current president. I think for me, what also stood out was that when he clarified why in the case of the CR17 case, the public protector, had clearly breached the separation of powers principle. This has been a very contentious issue. Other people have been calling for the unsealing of those CR17 documents. And in his response, if I'll just read it out quickly, he says that those are the cases that people are referring to when people say I flip-flop. In the so-called CR70 case, I refer to the parliamentary side when she, that being the public protector, instructed the speaker. She said the speaker must report to her. It's the same situation when it comes to her instruction to the NDDP, I beg your pardon. She said President Cyril Ramaphosa has made himself guilty of criminality and goes on and on and on. I think also what also came under the spotlight was that his struggle credentials also came under scrutiny. We heard the Commissioner Madonsela also, asking questions and saying that did Mlambo actually play a part in, the liberation of the country? And Mlambo said he had not. And he asked the question that how could you be the vanguard of the highest court in the land if you indeed did not participate, in the struggle of the country? I think for me also another contentious issue and what actually dominated yesterday's interview was the issue of, sexual harassment. We heard those, various commissioners asking him questions over sexual harassment. whether or not, these allegations are true. And later on, we saw, the chair of the JSC, Ubapete, they're saying that, listen, all those allegations, anything that has to do with sexual harassment must actually be expunged from the records of the JSC, is because those commissioners did not bring any, written warning. The witness himself, or the interviewee himself, I beg your pardon, was not forewarned about that. Towards the end of that interview, we heard Mlambo saying and asking and pleading the JSC for fairness throughout the proceedings. We also saw, the issue of corruption allegations actually, coming up as
Let's
well.
quickly touch on Zondo. No stranger to the highest court, no stranger to the public as well. If yesterday was anything to go by, this is going to be a very long day. What are some of that sticky points that he have to answer to? He's been quite vocal with regards to the attacks on the judiciary, which have come from some of the politicians, as well as some of his cases and rulings regarding the Zondo Commission.
I think today is going to be a very interesting day, Hasina. I mean, there's a perception out there. He's perceived, Zondo is perceived as a front runner by virtue of him being the acting, Chief Justice to actually, take over this role. But like you said, there's been criticism of him and his work at the Commission. Some have criticized him of pursuing a factional agenda. Some saying that he was not fair in some of the proceedings, as other witnesses wanted to cross-examine witnesses that had implicated them in state capture. Others have criticized him for not recusing himself on the issue of former President Jacob Zuma. And we actually expect commissioners to actually ask him about this very issue. So I do implore SABC news viewers to actually stay tuned to the State Capture Commission. I beg your pardon, to the JSC interviews today, as Hasina Gori will be giving you all the latest updates.
Yes, as we mentioned, quite an exciting day ahead with the acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo interviewing for that final candidate taking the very hot seat. So a long day expected. We are expected to start at 9 a.m. And if anything to go by yesterday, it's going to be a very, very interesting and robust conversation between those commissioners, asking him really important questions around the Zondo Commission, around the factionalism, that the perception that he seems to favor a faction, as well as his comments regarding those attacks on the judiciary. Back to you in studio.
Thanks so much, Hasina, Gori and Natasha Phiri there, and they will be keeping an eye on those proceedings for us throughout.